Hi, I'm Ann. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing the book The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear. So my audio sounds a little bit better. It is because I currently just got a new very fancy microphone, which I'll get to in my next video coming out tomorrow as to why I spent that money getting it. But today I'm going to be talking about this book that I actually received for Christmas from my mother. So I'm very excited to have finally read it. However, I will not say this book was exactly what I expected, and I do have some concerns about this book. And I'm not sure if I'm being too sensitive, or if I'm retrogressively looking back at this in a way that a child wouldn't necessarily look at it, because this book is very much geared towards a middle grader and I'm obviously an adult. So I'm curious to know after watching this video if you agree with me, if you noticed some of the stuff I did, or if you think I'm just being too sensitive. So what is this book about? This book follows Kit, who is this young woman, 16-year-old, who grew up in Barbados in the late 1600s, and her grandfather dies, who raised her, and she travels up to the colonies to live with her aunt and her aunt's family, and discovers there are a lot of prejudices in the town. This is set 5 years before the Salem witch trials, and she befriends this old woman who lives in the woods in this like swamp area, and everyone believes that old woman is a witch, but Kit finds her to be like the only nice person in the town. So you have a lot going on. You have a lot of elements. There's also some romance in there. There's also a lot of social commentary of stuff that was going on during that time period. There's a lot of elements of history that are woven in, like the rise of freedom, interest in freedom and gaining more rights from the colonies, from the King of England. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this book. And even though on the surface it is very much a middle grade book, there are a lot of like deeper themes and topics that are discussed in this book. And I'm going to talk about more of like the social stuff first and the history stuff first, because personally that to me was the most interesting. There will be spoilers near the end of this video. So first and foremost, let's talk about witchcraft and the history of witchcraft. Now this is set, like I said, 5 years before the Salem witch trials. It's set in 1687, I believe, and predominantly the witch trials started in 1692. And so it's a time where there was a lot of fear of the unknown and people who are different. There were a lot of prejudices within the mostly Puritan community. For example, the woman who Kit befriends, her name is Hannah, this old woman, she's a Quaker. So she is also widowed. Her husband died. So there is a lot of otherness when it comes to the behavior that she elicits. She also doesn't go to the meeting hall, as they call their Sunday service, because she wouldn't be welcome. And so you have this hostility towards her. You also find a hostility towards Kit because Kit was raised on Barbados. She was running around all the time being a, very rebellious, freedom-oriented girl. So when she comes to a very Puritan culture, she is very different than the average girl there. And because of that, she meets with hostility from certain members of the Puritan community. So you have that element of otherness and being outside of the norm, and that is a bad thing. And that is why eventually, slight spoilers, but I feel like the title gives it away, some people are accused of witchcraft because of just how different they are. And so you have that commentary. You also have the commentary of freedom and the idea of the rise in free thought and being able to think on one's own, and both from a sense of Kit, because Kit is very much a British citizen. She doesn't really care about, this idea of breaking away from England. That isn't even a concept that she ever would have considered. However, she meets certain people here in the United States, as it was the colonies, who are that way, who see issues with, I believe it's King Charles at the time of this book, having so much control over what happens in the colonies without actually helping and aiding the colonies. It's all about what can he get out of them. So you have that idea of like freedom also intermixing with the idea of like the witchcraft and the other, because it is these women like Hannah, like Kit, who are more free and have this sense of like we should be able to do what we want and act rightly as opposed to just what the community wants us to do. And that is seen as bad by the community because they are free and the community wants to very much restrict their behaviors. Then you also have, and this is the one element I don't think was handled well in the book, the idea of slavery. So in the beginning, Kit is introduced as coming from a country that has slaves. It's Barbados. And because she moves to a colony up north, it's not Virginia. It is very much not a thing to have slaves in the colony she moves to. But in Barbados, she grew up with slaves. So she doesn't see it as a bad thing. She just sees it as part of society, which isn't necessarily wrong. But I think there was a chance for the author to go a little bit more into that, give commentary on that, showing that, you know, similarly to how Kit, her freedom is restricted when she comes to the colonies, and how Hannah and her are thought as different and the others. That is the same way that many people looked at slaves, as being the other. And I think there would have been a very interesting commentary if the author had chosen to comment on that and include that into the story in how blacks are treated, similarly to how like these other women, these like witches, are treated. And I think there was an important discussion to be had in the book that was vastly ignored. It's only mentioned in the very beginning, and Kit has a conversation with I guess one of her main love interests, Nat, who is this captain's son, and he comments how slavery is bad, and we don't have that in the northern colonies. It's just in Virginia. So you have that like slight comment on it near the beginning of the book, and then for the rest of the book, it's not mentioned at all. Now, I understand, you know, you couldn't exactly avoid it because it's Barbados. There's a lot of slaves everywhere. Her grandfather was a plantation owner. You probably had to mention that she grew up with slaves. But if you did mention that, I feel like it would have been so much more powerful, even if it was just like a couple of scenes near the end of the book, to show how Kit saw the difference of how she was treated as the other, as below these Puritan people, as similarly to how slaves are treated as below the free people. So I just feel like it was an important conversation that could have been had, but it was missed in this book. And I don't necessarily think like every book has to discuss every issue, but I feel like you could have just focused on it even just for a few pages, and it would have been more important or interesting to have that conversation. So I feel like that was a lost chance. Let's get to actually talking about the story as opposed to the social and political and moral and historical context. So the story is a lot of fun. Kit is the type of character that you like. She is opinionated, but she also is very caring. Like, she arrives from Barbados with all her trunks, like she has 7 trunks filled with these fancy dresses that her cousins, her aunt's 2 daughters, have never seen before. And she immediately offers them, oh, you can try on any dress you want. You can have all my shawls. That's fine. Go ahead, have them. So she is very sharing, very caring, despite being like very opinionated and freedom oriented. There's this young girl who is in town that is not allowed to go to school by her mother, and so Kit ends up secretly teaching her to read and write in her spare time. She also befriends Hannah, this old widow that is living out in the forest, who's believed to be a witch by everyone, and so everyone avoids her, but Kit becomes her friend because she sees that important connection. So I think there's a lot of like great qualities to Kit's character that I enjoyed throughout this book. And you definitely see like the difference between her character being very open to change her mind and to change in general. She very much grows up from the beginning to the end. But then you see other characters who are not at all like that, who are very reluctant to change, whether it is her aunt's husband, who he does have some changes in the end. He's not like a horrible man, but you can see how he has these like firmly set biases at the beginning of the book. You also see a lot of the characters in town who are very biased and very much not willing to change. And you see that as one of the main themes, and I enjoyed seeing that throughout the book. And I enjoyed following along in Kit's journey of like finding a home and finding happiness in the end. She's courted by this like semi-wealthy young man in town, and then she also has a friendship with this like pastor who is this assistant to the pastor who is coming into town at the same time she does, and she befriends him. And then you have this other young man, Nat, who is on the ship that she comes in on and is the captain's son. So you have these like three men being, in a sense, love interests in the beginning of the book. As the story develops, some of them are less love interests, but I enjoyed how the book balanced so many elements for being just a middle grade book. It balanced, the elements of the social commentary, the historical commentary, while also having interesting characters and while also having like some romance. And so there's something, I think, in this book for everyone to enjoy and find interesting. Even as an adult, I found it very interesting to read. Saying that, let's get to the ending, and there will be spoilers in the ending. So in the ending, Hannah, the old woman living in the swamp, gets accused of witchcraft, and Kit ends up sneaking her out of town and putting her on the boat that Nat is on to take Hannah to safety. And then Kit is accused of helping Hannah and then of witchcraft herself. And eventually it comes out that she is cleared and everything like that. But she decides that she doesn't really want to stay here anymore, being surrounded by these types of people, in a sense. So she ends up leaving with Nat and getting married. There's also the two other men involved. One of the men was courting Kit, and she ends up deciding, he's pretty bad, because he basically abandons her when she's accused of witchcraft. And then you have this pastor's assistant. Then you have her two cousins also there, and Mercy is the oldest cousin, and she's super sweet, and then Judith is the younger cousin, and she is exuberant is the best way to describe her. And so you have Judith falling in love with the minister's assistant, and then the minister's assistant falls in love with Mercy, but when he goes to ask her father if he can court her, Judith thinks he's coming to court her instead, so there's like a whole confusion. And then the minister's assistant goes off to fight in war that's going on in the colonies, and then Judith decides she wants to marry the guy who was courting Kit because Kit turned him down and now he's not interested. And so Judith ends up with the wealthy man, and Mercy ends up with the minister's assistant, and Kit, of course, ends up with Nat. So I just felt like it was very convoluted when it came to the romance. How there were like so many elements that was like, why did you have to make the ending so happy? I feel like that is a horrible way to judge like the ending of the book, because I feel like when I was younger, I would have preferred a happy ending, but it just felt too happy. I wanted someone to end up like hurt, because Hannah, the old woman, ends up going to live with Nat's grandmother and being very happy. And you have everyone in town ending up really not having to pay for their actions and just living a happy life. And I would have liked the ending to be more bittersweet, for not everyone to end up happy, for the reality of history and life to be cruel and unforgiving, despite like some happiness being garnered from it. So I would have liked a super like sadder ending. Oh my gosh, I sound like a horrible individual, but it was a great book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and it's one of those books that I think you can definitely read as an adult and enjoy it a lot. I didn't read it as a kid, so I don't have that nostalgic quality of it, but I do feel like there were certain things that could have been expanded on in the book that if it was an adult book, it would have been much more of an interesting commentary on certain things like racism that wasn't really covered in the book that much, or like kind of ignored, like brought up and then ignored for the rest of the book. So I'm curious to know, have you guys read this book? Do you see some of the like issues I had with it, but then also like some of the great things about it? What was like your favorite parts of it? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!